might as well believe there's a culture where 2 + 2 = 5. It doesn't, well, maybe in our culture it does. Now, some people think math is racist.
My question for you is, I want to know your opinion on something. So in the beginning, your first point was that you don't agree with relative truths. You believe objective truths. And you gave good reasons for that. And I have a question, or I want to know your opinion on what you think of cultural truths, like cultural relativism, on how each culture has their own set of norms and traditions that they...
Okay, let's say that claim is true, that each culture has their own sets of norms and traditions. It would be objectively true that each culture has its own set of norms and traditions then. It's not a subjective truth. It's objectively true if that's true. Now, it is true that cultures do have different practices, but when you get underneath the practices, you realize they're just different ways of expressing the same thing. Like, for example, in some cultures, when you greet people, you greet them with a handshake, others with a hug, others with a kiss. Greet the brothers with a holy kiss, says Paul, right? The relative part of that is how to do it, but the fact you ought to greet people is consistent, all right? And we unpack this a lot, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. C.S. Lewis did some amazing work in his small book called The Abolition of Man, where he points out that regardless of what culture you're talking about, that cultures agree at their core on certain moral principles. Like, for example, that courage is better than cowardice. He said, if you want to believe that there are cultures that believe cowardice is better than courage, you might as well believe there's a culture where 2 + 2 = 5. It doesn't, well, maybe in our culture it does. Now, some people think math is racist. Okay, but no, cultures actually agree on the core values, and that's what Lewis points out in The Abolition of Man. So there are some variances, but the core values still persist. However, I will say this, the moral argument, which we didn't talk about tonight, but the moral argument says that there is an objective moral law, and there is therefore an objective moral lawgiver. Like, for example, if there's one objective moral law, like say it's wrong to torture babies for fun, then there has to be a moral lawgiver. Even if there are other moral principles that we don't agree on, it's true that it is wrong to torture babies for fun. However, let's use an example from World War II. Let's say that the Nazis won World War II. If they had won World War II, and brainwashed everyone to believe that it was okay to murder Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, and Jehovah's Witnesses, would it be right if everyone in the world believed it was morally right to murder Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, and Jehovah's Witnesses? Would it be morally right if everyone thought it was morally right? No. So in other words, the moral law does not depend on human agreement. The moral law depends on God's nature, which doesn't change. So just because sometimes we may misperceive that moral law doesn't mean that moral law doesn't exist. It still exists, even if we have errors in our minds about it.
What about something more extreme? Like my philosophy professor, he gave me an example of a cannibalistic society. Okay. So that society believes it's okay to eat their own people. But then to us, it's abhorrent. So I was wondering what you think. Well,
𝗧𝗔𝗫 has written about that. He's a philosopher from UT Austin in his book, What We Can't Not Know. And 𝗧𝗫 says that even cannibals don't think they should eat their own people. They think it might be okay to eat people from another tribe, but they dehumanize the other tribe, and they still have these rituals to try and atone for what they've done. So they still have this sense that it's wrong to eat other human beings. And by the way, how did Hitler get his SS and other people in his armed forces to murder Jews? How did he do it? He dehumanized the Jews. He called them less than human. That's the only way he could get people to overpower their sense that this wasn't wrong, he would try and convince them, you're not really murdering people. These are not really people. They're subhuman.